Well, we want to wish you a big Shabbat Shalom and welcome to the river, as we affectionately call it. We pray that wherever you are, whether on the live stream or whether you're watching after the fact on the recording, that you've had a fruitful and blessed Shabbat. And we just pray that the excitement of the fall appointed time soon to come upon us is starting to well up in all of our hearts, but also the reverence, because although Sukkot is fast approaching and Sukkot is a time of joy, leading up to Sukkot is Yom Kippur, and even before that, Yom Teruah. And we just pray that that the Father is doing the work necessary, that we may come before him with integrity, If you are watching after the fact on the recording and you wish to come join us live, we meet every Saturday on the Gregorian calendar, every weekly Shabbat, and we meet at 9 a.m. PST. And if you're wondering how to join the live stream, just go to riverbranchfellowship.com. Scroll down on the homepage, and there'll be a link to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. And all you have to do is type in your first and last name and email, and every Friday you'll receive the weekly newsletter, which also contains the Zoom login details for the live stream. So come and say hi. Join us for fellowship with a portion of the scattered body. And come say hi. Okay, the storms of life. This is going to be part one of a three-part series, and the series is going to be on Psalm 42 and 43. I know, very original name for this series. I thought, let's just keep it simple. And this series is going to be not only, I think it fits beautifully coming off the heels of Curtis's 6-part series on the seals of Revelation, but it's going to lead us perfectly into the lead up for the fall appointed times. And so after this 3-part series, Curtis is going to do a teaching on Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, and I will be doing a teaching on Sukkot and the last great day. And so Psalm 42 and 43, these have been very precious Psalms to me over the last few years. And most of you will maybe have experienced this, where there's a passage that speaks to you an awful lot, and you end up going on a journey over a long period of time. And in this particular instant, this is a pair of Psalms that, despite me understanding, I would say, quite a bit on the deeper issues within this psalm, I knew that I was missing something. And so they've been on my proverbial shelf now for about 4 years. And it was only in the lead up to this series that suddenly they came off the shelf without me even really consciously thinking about it. I had some really interesting God winks as to, Michael, it's time to take these Psalms off the shelf. And lo and behold, I understand why now it's taken this long for me to take these things off the proverbial shelf and actually do a deeper dive on it. Because within these 2 Psalms, I would argue, is encapsulating the great plan of redemption from the foundation of the earth right through to its completion. Beautiful set of Psalms and rich in depth. And a series like this, 3 parts, is going to be barely scratching the surface, if I'm to be honest. But we are going to look a little bit deeper at these Psalms, and I hope that this three-part series is going to be as much of a blessing to you as it has been to me. I know that I've been on a really interesting journey in my studies regarding these two Psalms, and hopefully you will see why I make the statement. Not only do I think these are a perfect follow-on from Curtis's Revelation Birth Pain series, but also to lead us into the fall appointed times. And so, part one, the storms of life. Think trials, tribulations, the struggles, the wrestles that we have in this time domain as part of our fallen experience and the purpose of them. You know, all of us go through difficult situations if we're not already going through them now. And it's easy to sometimes get to a place of why, Father? Why? Why do you allow these things to happen? And as we mature in our faith, we start to understand that these things are there to refine us, to remove the dross of our lives. But it goes much, much, much deeper than this. And I hope that we can start to really scratch underneath that surface with this three-part series. Just to give you a very brief overview of what this series will entail. So today we're looking at the storms of life, the trials and the tribulations of our life here and now in this fallen time domain as we approach the end of this age. And what they're for and why Yah allows these things in our lives. Part two, this is where it got very surprising for me. I was not banking on going down this line of thinking out of Psalm 42 and 43 of all places. But we're going to look at Zechariah's vision of the two olive trees and the menorah. There's a really interesting link in Psalm 42 and 43 that takes us straight to Zechariah's vision. And by virtue of Zechariah's vision, it actually leads us to the two witnesses. And I believe that when you bring together the understanding of Psalms 42 and 43 alongside Zechariah's vision, it actually gives you a deeper insight into one of the primary functions of the two witnesses that even for me has kind of to a point evaded me up until this point. And it wasn't until really taking these two Psalms off the proverbial shelf that I was led down this very interesting journey. And this part will be perfect coming off the heels of part one. And then part three, we're going to look at this statement in Psalm 43, send forth your light and your truth, that they may lead me to your set apart mountain. And essentially how Psalm 42 and 43 speaks of a journey and a path to the bridal altar of Messiah. And so we're dealing with pretty big, weighty topics. And again, a three-part series to a degree doesn't really do it justice. I mean, as I was going through the prep for this series, I was thinking, what direction do I go in? I can go down so many directions, but that's the way I've been led. And so know that this is what you're going to expect over the coming weeks. So, just a little bit of context about Psalm 42 and 43. You may be wondering why two Psalms? Well, originally, these two Psalms were actually originally one Psalm. They were composed as one. And as we're going to see from the literary structure of Psalm 42 and 43, and especially the themes contained within it, without a shadow of a doubt, these things were one psalm. It's only in our modern Bibles where paragraphs, headings, and verse numbers and chapter numbers came in and started to separate all these things into their component parts. But originally, these two psalms were one psalm. So I want people to think of Psalm 42 and 43 as one. They're one oratory. They're one poem, as it were, by King David. It's generally thought to have been written by King David during his flight from his son Absalom, when Absalom usurped his throne. And this is going to be, I want people to really understand this is an important point of context for what we're about to go through on this journey. Because, okay, there is a line of thought that this was written by a priest or a psalm that was exiled, but I do not believe this to be the case, especially when you dive deeper into it. And so we all understand, I hope most people are aware of the story where Absalom, who is one of King David's sons, usurped the throne and actually caused David for a very short period of time to go into exile. And, you know, there's a few chapters dedicated to this, and King David had some interesting encounters where his own people, especially those closest to him, would actually come against him. And so the context of what we're about to read and what we're about to go through on this 3-part series is that of someone in the house of Israel where other people within the house of Israel are actively coming against you. Not only those in the house of Israel, but those as close as maybe even your children, or, you know, by extension, those within your family nucleus. And for those of you who have experienced betrayal at that level of intimacy, you'll understand how difficult a time this is. And in Psalm 42 and 43, we're getting David's lament. We're getting a real heart into what David is going through at the mind and heart level when those closest to him within the so-called house of Israel are actively coming against you and betraying you, even to the point of usurping you and exiling you. Key point as well, we're not going to go through the story of David and Absalom. This is something you can do in your own time. But David's actions, and I've put here in brackets, and lack thereof, can actually be traced as the root cause of Absalom's usurping. So yes, David was going through a really hard time where his son usurped him. But when you actually get familiar with the story of King David, you will see that he did certain questionable things, but there were also questionable inactions on his part where he allowed certain things to go on, even within his family nucleus, which would then go on to cause heaps of problems for him down the line. And so while I don't want to take away the point that Absalom had his free will and his sovereignty, and he made some poor choices, and those are on him. But David was Absalom's father, and there were things during King David's life, like I said, actions and even inactions, which sometimes are even more problematic than making mistakes, that would actually bring about a lot of problems for King David. For example, Yah said that because of some of the actions that David did, the sword would not leave his family during his lifetime. That's on King David. And so understand this. This is the context of what we're about to go through, of going through the storms of life. You know, the blame or the culprit is not just them, right? We like going to a place of almost victim mentality in our trials where it's everybody else's and everything else's fault. And actually, we're going to see that one of the key points of Yah allowing these storms in our life is so that we actually start looking in the mirror. Yes, sometimes we get dealt a bad set of cards, but we never stop to think, well, did I have a part to play in this? Did my action or inaction sometimes cause part of the problem? And if so, does this feed into why Yah would even allow storms in our lives to occur? And so understand, this is the context of everything we're about to go through. In your own time, go look at the life of King David and, you know, go see if the point that Michael is making is true. Go see if it is so. But again, This is during a time of those in the house of Israel coming against the individual, usurping them. But when you peel back all the layers, you realize, is the person in question part of the problem? And so is this why Yah would even allow these things in our lives? Okay. We're going to read all the way through Psalm 42 and 43. They're very short, 16 verses in total. But there's two very interesting literary structures that occur within the Psalm. Again, which point to the fact that these were one. But when there's a intentional structure within a Psalm, or any biblical passage for that matter, it's like the Ruach is saying, hey, look here, there's a nugget here, there's a gem to be uncovered. So we're going to read through Psalms 42 and 43, and you're going to see as we read through it that I've color-coded certain verses that highlight the literary structure of the Psalm. Now, the first literary structure is that it's built up into three main components or stanzas. A stanza is basically a group, or think of it as a paragraph. And so Psalms 42 and 43 are structured as three stanzas, three paragraphs. And you're going to see that there's these key themes and this key language that's repeated in all three stanzas. So, Psalm 42, as a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O Elohim. My soul thirsts for Elohim, for the living Elohim. When shall I come and appear before Elohim? So there's this cry to be in the presence of Elohim. King David is experiencing a perceived separation from the face of Yah because of the trials he's going through. My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all the day long, where is your Elohim? And so the they in this passage is actually those of the house of Israel. Remember that the Apostle Paul would go on about vessels of honor in the house and vessels of dishonor in the house. And right now, King David is feeling the actions of the dishonorable vessels within the house of Elohim. In this particular instance, from his own son. These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I would go with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of Elohim with glad shouts of songs and praise, a multitude keeping festival, i.e. the appointed times. So this verse is telling you that the they is actually from within the house of Israel. The very people that King David was feasting with at the appointed times were the very ones that would end up coming against him, as would be warned of in 2 Peter 2 and in Jude and in the Apostle Paul's letters. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in Elohim, for I shall again praise him for the salvation of his face. And this is going to be a verse, this language that you're going to see repeated over each three of the stanzas. It continues, O my Elohim, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore, I remember you from the land of Jordan and of Hermon, from Mount Mizar. Deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have gone over me. And this is going to be really the verse that we break down today. We're going to see that this is nautical imagery that's used for Yah allowing trials and the storms of life to occur in our lives. By day, Yah commands his steadfast love, and at night his song is with me, a prayer to the Elohim of my life. I say to Elohim, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? as with a deadly wound in my bones, or this can be translated as with murder in my bones. My adversaries taunt me while they say to me all the day long, where is your Elohim? So again, we see this repetition of those within the house coming against King David. Again, why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in Elohim, for I shall again praise him, the salvation of my face and my Elohim. And so this verse, with a slight tweak in this final sentence, gets repeated again. Psalm 43, judge me, O Elohim, and defend my cause against an ungodly people. From the deceitful and unjust man, deliver me. So again, this theme of those within the house coming against you gets repeated again. But look at what King David's saying, judge me. Judge me, defend my cause. I mean, this is a really bold statement to be able to say, to come before Elohim and saying, pass sentence on me. Because Elohim has the power of life and death in his hand. King David knows that the judgment against him could go in his favor or it could go against him. But King David is confident to be able to go up to Elohim and say, judge me, pass sentence on me. Notice it's not the ungodly that David is asking to be judged. David is asking that he be judged. For you are the Elohim in whom I take refuge. Why have you rejected me? Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Again, this theme gets repeated again. Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your set apart mountain would be a better translation of this. And to your dwelling. So, i.e. Mount Zion. The dwelling here, the word there is Mishkan, the tabernacle, this intimacy with the Creator. Then I will go to the altar of Elohim, to Elohim, my exceeding joy, and I will praise you with the lyre, O Elohim, my Elohim. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in Elohim, for I shall again praise him, the salvation of my face and my Elohim. Okay, so hopefully people can see the literary structure of the three sections of Psalm 42 and 43. There's this repetition of why are you cast down, O my soul? There's this repetition of being rejected. There's this repetition of the so-called ungodly from the dishonorable vessels within the house coming against the honorable vessel. So hopefully people can see why one of the reasons why these two Psalms are in fact one. Now, that's the first literary structure of three stanzas with repeating themes. But when I was going through my studies, I had it in my spirit. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a chiastic structure in this psalm. Well, lo and behold, there is. There is a chiastic structure from Psalm 42:8 through to 43 verse 4. I tried to see if the whole two Psalms were a chiastic structure. I could this is the only place I could find a clear chiastic structure. And so notice that there's 7 columns here, okay? So think of this as a menorah, okay? And people will know that a chiastic structure, you get these repeating themes that all point into the middle to a central point. Now, in English, we're going from left to right because we speak English, but in the Hebrew, you would have been going from right to left, okay? So for the sake of today's teaching, I'm going to keep it left to right, but understand that in the Hebrew, you go from right to left, which interestingly is the direction you would have gone from east to west when you were entering into the temple. When you were entering into the temple courts to bring your sacrifice, you would go from east and you would walk westward. This is a pattern of exile that the house of Israel cast off to the east, and they return from the east, from right to left, from east to west, okay? And so it's really interesting that that would have been the journey you go through to get into the temple and to go through the various stages. And look at what some of where this concludes, of going to the altar of Elohim. David is in a place of, he feels a separation from Yah, and he knows that eventually he will take this journey from east to west. I find that very interesting, and I do not believe this to be by mistake. Okay, theme 1, Elohim's distant presence. David says that Yah commands his steadfast love. But look at this. At night, Yah's song is with him. Now, notice he doesn't say that the physical presence of Yah is with him. He's actually away from the altar, so to speak. That doesn't come around till 43 verses 3 and 4. But David is experiencing a distant, quote unquote, presence. Yah is with him, but there's not this full intimacy. David feels like there's a separation. Okay, that's theme 1. The next theme is David feels like he has been forgotten by Elohim. He hasn't been forgotten, but that's how he feels, okay? And we'll get to feelings and emotions in a sec. The third theme is persecution from the wicked, and the wicked being the dishonorable vessels within the house of Israel. This is the central focal point here. David is going through a struggle. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? David is experiencing this battleground of the mind, this battleground at the heart and soul level. However, in spite of what he's experiencing in the mind, David has a confident expectation, hope in Elohim, for I shall again praise him. He shall see the salvation of his face. And so this becomes the focal point. Now then we go in reverse, like in a mirror image, judgment and deliverance from the wicked. So here David is saying, judge me and defend me against the ungodly and against the wicked. So you can see this parallel going on with the theme of the wicked. Again, you are the Elohim in whom I take refuge. Why have you rejected me? Why do I go about mourning? So here David feels rejected. Back over here, he feels forgotten. So again, this theme of being forgotten, or a perceived being forgotten by Elohim. But look at this one. This one culminates with Elohim's intimate presence. Send out your light and your truth. Let them, light and truth, lead me. Let them bring me to your set apart mountain, to Mount Zion, to your dwelling place, to your tabernacle. Then he will go to the altar. And so I hope people can see this chiastic structure as laid out in these two Psalms. Well, one Psalm. And notice that there's a journey, right? Now, again, in English, we're going from left to right, but in the Hebrew, you would have gone from right to left. And again, I believe this parallels how you would have approached the tabernacle, going from east to west. And essentially, what you have is a journey of feeling Elohim's distant presence, and the end point of the journey is being in Elohim's intimate presence. Now, I want to point out, David was not a Levite or a priest. He was from the tribe of Judah. How then can he be in the intimate presence of Elohim, physically in the shadow picture? I believe you're getting an inference into David thinking prophetically within a plan of redemption perspective. And as part of this journey are all these storms of life, okay? The perception of being forgotten by Elohim, persecution from the dishonorable vessels in the house. And this becomes the focal point, the battleground of the mind, the battleground of the soul and heart. However, this is contrasted with this confident expectation. And so to speak in modern terms, David is experiencing this kind of cognitive dissonance because his emotions, his soul are in turmoil, yet he has this confident expectation. And we'll get to the confident expectation in part 3 when we look at this Yah sending out light and truth, let them guide to that place of intimacy. Today, we're going to focus on this, the struggle part of it. Okay, so this was the focal point of the journey. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in Elohim, for I shall again praise him, the salvation of my face and my Elohim. We'll deal with the statement in white more in part 3. Today, we're going to focus more on this highlighted in orange statement. So there's 2 words here. So we've got cast down, in turmoil. The word for cast down, his soul is cast down. It means to bow, to crouch, to bow down, to be bowed down. Shachach is the Hebrew, if you could get your gutturals at the back of your throat. Look at this, though, to be prostrated, to be humbled, to be reduced, to be weakened, to proceed humbly, to be bowed down, to prostrate oneself, to lay down, to also be cast down, to be in despair. But the predominant meaning of why are you cast down, O my soul, is why are you being humbled? Why are you being put to the ground, so to speak? Why are you in this state of mourning? Because David is saying, I have a confident expectation in Elohim. I know I will end up at the altar of Elohim in the grand scheme of things, but this is where I'm at now. This is what I feel, okay? When you do a bit of a deeper dive on this word, I got this from the Treasury, the TWOT, the Word Book of the Old Testament. This is what it has to say. In all instances of shachach, in the nifal and hifil, these are verbal forms. The meaning is to be brought low in the sense of be humbled, to have one's arrogance knocked out of him. So David is experiencing the pride being knocked out of him. And as a result of this, he's experiencing this battle at the mind and heart level. In the Kal meaning of, the meaning of to de-pedestalize the arrogant appears also in Isaiah 2:11, 17, Psalm 107:39, and perhaps Job 9:13, where the best English translation would be they grovel at his feet. So this word is actually predominantly used of knocking the pride out of someone. So David has, despite the fact he's experiencing this battleground in his mind and experiencing all these emotions of despair, he knows he's having the pride knocked out of him. And he's saying, why? Why? Could it have something to do with the end result of going to the altar of Elohim? There are several extended meanings of shachach in the Kal. One is to bow in the sense of doing obeisance before another human being. This is illustrated in Isaiah 60:14 and Proverbs 14:19. The evil bow down before the good. So this is actually, I believe, end of the age speak. A second would be to bow down in the sense of to walk in a stooped posture, dejected, as in a period of mourning. And these are the references for that. And so we see that what David is really saying is, why am I having the pride knocked out of me? I'm experiencing all this dissonance within my spirit, within my soul, and it's humbling me. As a result, I'm in a period of mourning. And this makes sense as to, remember what David is going through. His son is usurping him and has caused him to go into exile for a period of time. The other word was in turmoil, hamah. To murmur, growl, roar, cry aloud, mourn, rage, sound, make noise, a tumult, to be clamorous, disquieted, to be loud, to be moved, troubled, to be in uproar, to be turbulent. Basically, David's soul is unsettled. He's unsettled at the core of his being, i.e., he's experiencing a battleground. He doesn't know what's going on because he's got this hope, this confident expectation, Elohim, yet his soul, and we're going to see that there's nautical ocean imagery used in this psalm. David is saying that his soul is like an ocean that's experiencing a storm, i.e. the battleground of the mind. And this is the focal point of this chiastic structure, the comparison or the juxtaposition of experiencing this battleground, of having the pride knocked out of him, despite the fact that he has a confident expectation to be in the intimate presence of Elohim. And that this is all part of a journey, essentially, into the temple, into the intimate place of Elohim's presence. This root, hamar, is used 34 times, meaning to cry out, to make a loud noise, or to be turbulent. It is a strong emphasizing unrest, commotion, strong feeling, or noise. So, when we speak about the noise that goes on in our brains, usually because of leaven, but also because of our emotions. And so, going back to this focal point, why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you being humbled? Why are you experiencing pride being knocked out of you? And why are you in a state of battle? Why are you disquieted? Why are you like the ocean experiencing a storm within me? Because David says, I have a confident hope and expectation in Elohim. I shall again praise him. And then he goes on to say that he will be at the altar of Elohim. So why am I experiencing this now, despite the fact of this great hope? David is clearly experiencing the battleground of the mind. Clearly. He's in a state of unrest. I don't want to say he's in a state of depression, but he is having the pride knocked out of him. To speak more colloquially, right when David feels he needs a spiritual cuddle is actually when he's being forced to have the pride knocked out of him and being forced to look in the mirror. Remember what I said at the beginning, that when you look at David's life, he may have played a part he definitely played a part in the trials that would come in his life, especially through his family. And I believe that these storms of his life caused him to look in the mirror. Now, let me ask this. Is experiencing the battleground of the mind sin in of itself? Is experiencing doubt, experiencing these negative so-called emotions, is that sin? Is the struggle against your fallen nature sin in of itself? Because religion will get you to a place that just because you're fallen, because you experience this battleground, that now you're worthless. Is experiencing the battleground of the mind, the wrestle itself, sin in of itself? I believe not. The issue is not the struggle itself. The issue is what we do with it. How do we go about it? David is experiencing the battleground of the mind. What if David allowed that battleground to now dictate his decisions and actions? Would that be sin? It would certainly lead to it and some very unwise choices. I mentioned this in the Desire series when we looked at the servant's heart. There's this beautiful example given to us by our king. This is when our king is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Yeshua experienced the battleground of the mind. You're seeing you're seeing his humanity come through here. He's experiencing the wrestle. In fact, I've called this the ultimate crushing. He's about to go pay his life for the plan of redemption. And even in that moment, Yeshua is saying, let this cup pass from me if possible. However, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. He asked a second time. So, leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. He prayed for this 3 times. Don't tell me that Yeshua was not experiencing the battleground of the mind. He's experiencing a wrestle like no other. No other. But look at, so Yeshua, the king, the creator, experienced the battleground. Did he sin? No. He submitted his desire to the plan of redemption and the will of the Father. Not as I will, but as you will. And so King David is experiencing a crushing. Again, religion will get you to a place that just because you struggle, you're in sin. And so having the wrestle, having the struggle is not the issue. The issue is, how do we go about it? Do we let the battleground of the mind govern our actions and our decisions? Yeshua didn't. He submitted. He took every thought captive and submitted it. This is a key thing. So, especially when we get to the understanding, as we will see, that Yah allows these struggles to come in our life. So if we're going to say that having a struggle is sin, you're indirectly saying that Yah is causing you to sin, which I really struggle with that statement. Yah's the one that's going to be allowing these struggles in our life. But what is it that he wants to see? What are you going to do through it? What are you going to choose in spite of your struggle? Did David know that it was Elohim who was humbling him? It seems almost like a silly question. I believe he did. In fact, he flat out says it, and we're going to look at this. So again, is having the struggle sin? No, especially if these things are coming from Elohim or being allowed by Elohim. The question is what do we do with it? And why would Elohim even allow these things in our lives? Let's look at the ocean imagery in this psalm. It's all over. Deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have gone over me. If you do some cursory Bible study on this imagery of the breakers and the waves going over you, it's used by Job, it's used by Jonah, it's used by King David, it's used by Asaph in the Psalms. It's metaphorical language, but look who's the author of these things. Elohim is the author of the breakers and the waves, these trials and testings, these waterfalls. Now, the waterfall here, it depends on your translation. The Hebrew word is sinur. It means a pipe. It can mean several things: a culvert, a gutter, a spout, a conduit, a water conduit, a water spout. Now, think of it as something tubular. Okay, tubular that contains water is the best way to describe it. Now, again, like the English, really, a waterfall, like, I don't know about you, but the image of a waterfall falling on me brings up this lovely little oasis, you know, of this little sprinkle. And this is not what the Hebrew is saying. You know, a water spout. Who knows what a water spout is? Think of it as a tornado over the sea that sucks up the water. That's probably what the Hebrew is referring to. Think of a water tornado. These water spouts have a particular kind of circular motion at the point, and being hollow within, they attract vast quantities of water, which frequently pours down in torrents upon the earth. These spouts are frequent on the coast of Syria, i.e. the Middle East, and no doubt the psalmist had often seen them and the ravages which they make. Essentially, these were water tornadoes happening out on the sea, and they would move inland and just dump water everywhere and create destruction. It kind of changes the imagery, right? Now you'll understand why I used the imagery for this teaching that I did. Like, you see this imagery all over scripture of Yah being in the storm, especially with the book of Job, right? That the voice of Yah came from the storm. And David is saying that the roar of his water tornado, right? Think destruction. Your breakers and your waves have gone over me. This is ocean imagery, okay? It kind of, it certainly makes it way more grandiose and brings about a healthy dose of fear and reverence when you think of it this way. This word here, your waves have gone over me. The word singular, gal, in the plural, galim, it literally means something rolled. So it can be used of many things, a heap of stone or even dung. So by implication, ruins, things that have been rolled over. And so it can also be used of waves, i.e. these waves that roll over and come crashing down. David is saying, your waves are crashing down upon me. This water tornado, this water spout is crashing down upon me. And it causes ruin. It causes destruction. The word here, breakers, mishbar, okay, in the Hebrew, it means a breaker of the sea, i.e. a massive wave that is starting to tip over and comes crashing down, okay? Some of you may have seen some surfing wipeouts, right? And that these things can actually be really dangerous and surfers will lose their lives. You know, you think of tsunamis coming in. Like the imagery here that David is trying to bring out is that there's a water spout, a water tornado out at sea. It's dumping huge amounts of water on him, which is actually a double-edged thing because yes, it causes destruction, but we know that water purifies. To be washed by the water of the word. You know, in this community, we use this imagery of being in the river. And sometimes the river can get pretty crazy, right? It's the same imagery that these waves, these tidal bursts, these tsunamis are coming in and causing destruction. Okay? Now, the word mishbar, a breaker of the sea, it comes from the word shavar, to burst, literally to break apart. And so, like, literally it can also mean to decimate, like to wreak utter destruction when it's in the intensive PL form. Now, what's really interesting is, remember that the vowel points in Hebrew were kind of added after the fact. And there's another root which uses the same letters, the sheen, the bait, and the resh, okay? And this other word can be shavar or savar. Like instead of a sh, it's a sa, okay? And what's really interesting is that this root here can mean to inspect, to examine. Think of metals being put through the fire and being inspected and examined for purity. Is that kind of refining, you know, and it's in the context of destroying. You know, think about being put through the refinery, being melted right down, being destroyed to be purified. Now, because it can mean to inspect, to examine, it can actually mean to wait and to hope and to wait for. I.e. you're examining something and you're waiting for an end result. Okay? And so all of this, David is saying, remember also the focal point of the journey where it says that David is experiencing the battleground of the mind. What was his confident expectation? Hope in Elohim, for I shall again see the salvation of his face. This hope, this confident expectation. Now, this word here, mishbar, at the root word family level has this idea of being smashed, being broken, so that he can be inspected and examined, and that the Yah is waiting and hoping for something. I mean, this is really deep. This now starts to get into, why would Yah allow this in your life? Why would Yah allow the storms of life to ravage destruction in your life? What's he inspecting? What's he examining? What's he waiting on? What's he hoping for? Paul says in one of the letters to the Corinthians that when all is said and done, when this time domain is done, faith, love, and hope will remain. And that the greatest of these is love, right? Hope. These will remain, i.e., they are eternal in nature. These are eternal in nature. Faith, remember, is it's a marriage term. Fidelity. Being true to your spouse, i.e. faithful, dependable, trustworthy, right? This is a marriage covenant term. That's eternal in nature. So is hope. Now, we think of hope as something whimsical way off in the distance. Oh, I hope this may, right? In the Western idea of hope is this idea of it may come to pass. In the Hebrew mindset of hope, it's like, this is coming without a shadow of a doubt. And it's actually very similar to the idea of faith. It's sure, it's tested. It just hasn't occurred yet, but it's coming. It's the essence of things unseen, but you can hang your hat on it. And love, obviously, and the greatest of these is love. Now, a relationship is two-way, right? Love goes two-way. A husband and a bride love one another. They have faith and faithfulness towards one another. They have a confident expectation and confidence in one another. It goes two ways. And we always focus on me. I hope in Elohim. I have faith in Elohim. I. Well, what about the other end of the equation? Does he love you? Does he have faith in you? Does he hope for you? And so the question I want to ask is, who is Elohim waiting on and hoping for? We know in hindsight and in foresight that there's going to be a groom. There is a groom, but that there's going to be a bride that will help govern with him. And she has overcome. She has endured until the end. She has been refined by fire. Do you think that these storms of life have something to factor in? David is saying, why? I know, look, let me phrase it. I know that Elohim is working on me. David is basically saying, I know I will end up at the bridal altar. But despite knowing that, despite having this confident expectation, he's struggling. He's struggling. You start to really get at the essence of why the fallen experience when you really dig deep in this psalm. And so who is Elohim waiting on and hoping for through this process of examination and refining? I don't know about you, but it's beautifully reverent for me. So why are the trials? Let's take a detour in the book of Job. I think it's safe to say we all know that Job went through some trials, right? He lost everything except his wife. And his life. Everything else was taken from him. Job says this, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, And at the last, he will stand upon the earth. This is, think the fulfillment of the fall appointed times. After my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see Elohim. Now, we know in the book of Revelation that one of the promises to the overcomers is that they shall see Elohim face to face, and that he will wipe away all their tears. So Job is speaking overcoming language. He's saying, I will see Elohim bodily, okay? Physically. Whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. This is bridal speak. This is fidelity language. This is faithfulness here. I will behold my groom, is what he's saying. My eyes will not wander over some strange woman. Job had a confident expectation that he will be a part of the bride of Messiah. However he understood that, he's speaking bridal language. He knew that. He knew that in his faith, in his confident expectation. Why is this important? Job says this earlier in the book, for the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. Job fears something and it's come upon him. Why is this important? In light of Job knowing that he will be part of the bride of Messiah. In 1 John 4, we read this, by this love is perfected in us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out all fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. And so what's really interesting here is that Job had a confident expectation of faithfulness, that he would be part of the bride of Messiah. John is saying that if love is truly perfected, there's no fear. Yet Job is saying that what he feared came upon him. What I'm trying to say is that Job's love had not yet been perfected. And could this be as to why Yah would bring the huge storm in his life that he did? To perfect love. We haven't got, there's many more themes in the book of Job, that actually Job had some deep-rooted pride that was very subtle, but there was a bit of pride that needed to be knocked out of him, which again points us directly back to what we saw with King David. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why are you in this position of being humbled and having the pride taken out of you? I believe that Job and King David's trials were to perfect love. Why? Because they had a desire to be at the altar, the bridal altar of Elohim. But what Yah was doing for Job and King David is like, okay, I will grant your wish. You wish to be my bride. Okay, I will give you your heart's desire. However, your love has not been yet perfected. And our Creator desires perfect love. Think perfect as brought to full maturity. A fully mature love. Yah's not going to have a child bride. Job 1. What did Job fear? His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. I believe you're getting an insight into what Job may have feared here. Wayward children. I think a lot of parents would understand this. Now, yes, there is a place for intercession, interceding on behalf of someone. and that is biblical. But when you understand the sacrifices and redemption, you'll know that the sins of the father will not be held against the children, and the sins of the children will not be held against the fathers. Each one has their own sovereign choice. And so while I appreciate that Job was interceding on his children's behalf, ultimately, his children will stand before Elohim, not Job. What did Job fear? I believe we're getting an insight. And was this part of why? Look, we know that these sons and daughters, they were killed. They died. Job would have had to face his fear as a parent. What if my children had sinned and cursed God in their hearts? They're dead now. They're going to face the judgment. What can I do? And that's the point. Job, you can't do anything. They stand before me, not you. And he had to learn this the hard way. Love had to be perfected. Not only Job, but arguably Job's children. Let this be an encouragement to the parents out there, a reverent encouragement. But Job had to learn this the hard way. Let's look at the process of being humbled. How does Elohim humble us? Because we see this imagery of trials, storms, waves, that these are there to humble us, to knock the pride out of us, so that Elohim can inspect us. Because Elohim has a hope and desire for his bride. Ecclesiastes 3, for everything, there is an appointed time. The word here, season, in the Hebrew, it's a different word. It's not moed, it's zman. A set time, an appointed occasion. For everything, there is an appointed time, i.e., Yah has set this in motion. And for a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. Job had to learn this about his children. There was an appointed time for his children to die, to teach him a lesson, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. Go do some homework on that. That's the language used for the scattering and regathering of the house of Israel. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Notice there's a time for good and evil, and that this has been appointed by the Creator. We are to experience good and evil. What does Isaiah say? Who's the author of good and evil? I, Yah, create both good and evil. The question is, why? What's the purpose of it? A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. Think of that what Peter would say, that we are being built up, living stones into a living, a spiritual dwelling place of Elohim in the spirit. What stones biblically would you cast away? Leprous stones. Interesting. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Elohim is the originator of all these things, and he has appointed a time for us to experience these things. Again, why? What gain has the worker from his toil? Now, this is a deep, deep statement right here, especially in the Hebrew. Remember, what was the outcome of the fall? Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it. for Adam, for the woman, in toil and in pain, you shall bear children and raise children. This is why the Apostle Paul would say that the woman shall be saved through childbearing. Why? Because that's the woman's toil. And when you look at the Hebrew, actually, you can translate this as, what does the worker have remaining from his toil? Which has overtones of, what Paul would speak of, that we all have to face the judgment seat of Messiah to see what our works are made of, whether of wood, clay, stubble, or whether of gold, silver, and precious stone. And so riddle me this: what does the worker have remaining from his toil, which was allotted to him at the fall of man? What remains? Why would Yeshua say, do not build your treasures here on earth, but build them up where moth and rust do not destroy? You mean that through our toil here on earth, which is for our sake, we can build gold, precious stones in the spiritual, a reward? I have seen the task Elohim has given to the sons of men to be humbled by it. This is the context of good and evil, the wrestle, the battleground, the good things and the troubled times. And how we go about it with our toil in this time domain. You mean we could actually have something remaining after Judgment Day from our toil? And Solomon is telling you why, so that you can be humbled. Which again takes us right back to what King David was saying. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you having the pride knocked out of you? The word here for humbled is anah, which is what we're to do on Yom Kippur. Now, modern Western society teaches us to avoid evil or bad at all costs. You cannot feel sad. You're not allowed to feel depressed. Here, we're going to drug you up so you don't feel depressed. You're not allowed to experience hardship. You're not allowed to, you cannot have these things. It's bad. Essentially, Western society has taught you to avoid the process that Elohim has given us so that we can be humbled, so that we can have the pride knocked out of us, so that it can lead us to the bridal altar. That's how serious it is. Who has appointed both good and evil, and why? Who has appointed for the storms of life to bring hardship in your lives? He's inspecting us. He's examining us, because guess what? Elohim, he has a hope and a desire. Psalm 37, David understood this. It's the meek that shall inherit the earth and delight themselves in abundant peace. The word here is anavim, which comes from this root word anah, to be humbled, poor, afflicted, meek, lowly, right? Now, inheritance. This is bridal governance speak. I don't have time to go through all the thing, but this is the reward. You inherit something after this life. There's going to be a judgment. There's going to be those that inherit. There are going to be those that lose their inheritance. Think of Esau, who sold his inheritance, right, for a bowl of meat to pursue the desires of the flesh. He sold his inheritance, right? And so again, what has the worker remaining from his toil in the time domain? Because it will humble him. It may actually be part of your inheritance spiritually, i.e. the treasures where moth and rust do not destroy. And modern Western society has taught you to avoid this process at all costs. You need to be happy all the time. You need to be laughing all the time. You need to feel good all the time. And if you feel anything somewhat negative, hey, here's a bottle of pills. Or hey, go drown your sorrows. Or, hey, go distract yourself with whatever idol you have in your life and worship that. His ways are not our ways. Our flesh would prefer it if we could do this while feeling happy all the time, wouldn't it? We don't enjoy the crushings. We understand we have to go through them if we're starting to mature in the faith, but it doesn't make it easier to go through. Hence why the focal point of that chiastic structure was this juxtaposition was, despite the fact that I have a hope in Elohim, I'm struggling. This is not easy. He, Elohim, has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart. That translation is correct, by the way. He has put the eternal in man's heart. Yet, man cannot find out what Elohim has done from the beginning to the end. I actually believe that, on a slight tangent, because there's this idea of eternity intrinsically built into man, if you evade the process that Elohim has given, this appointed time for both good and evil, this wrestled so that we can be humbled, have the pride knocked out of us, if we avoid that, I actually believe that man goes mad, so to speak. Because there's this thing intrinsically in man that's eternal, but when man doesn't do things Elohim's ways, man is a fallen, finite being with an eternal aspect to him. If you're not submitted to his ways, it's going to drive you mad. What? Look around in society. It's gone mad. Why? I believe this verse is telling you. I perceived that there is nothing better for them, for man, than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that every man should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is Elohim's gift to man. Boy, is that statement deep. Now, this statement, taking pleasure in your toil, when we go through the trials, do we take pleasure in them? You know, this should bring up Yaakov, James, when he says, you know, rejoice in all trials and temptations. But we go through these things and then we fall into self-condemnation because we're not happy. We're not, you know, experiencing pleasure. That's not the biblical view. David is experiencing the battleground of the mind. Despite that, he has a confident expectation, a biblical joy that surpasses all logical understanding. But it's not coming out in his emotions. His emotions are saying one thing, his spirit is saying another. The book of James or Yaakov is not saying eat, drink, be merry, and feel happy during your trials. He's saying have joy. If you don't understand that statement, I highly recommend the teaching that Curtis and I did off the heels of Sukkot 2023, joy. Because joy does not equal happiness. Joy is separate of happiness. You can feel joy and be happy, but you can also feel joy and be sad, so to speak. Biblical joy is something else. So what is Solomon really saying? Taking pleasure in toil. This is Elohim's gift to man. Okay, here it says, Ve'ra'a tov bechol amalu. A better translation is not to take pleasure in your toil. It's to see the good in all your toil. Ra'a in Hebrew means to see. Tov means good. And it's a wide... So to see the good in your toil, when you phrase it that way, now it means that you can experience negative emotion, but know that it's doing you good in the end. And this should bring up loads of passages, do not despise the reproof of Elohim, because if you're experiencing reproof, it means you are legitimate sons, knowing that these things bring about repentance, essentially. Yaakov, rejoice in your trials, for they bring about the peaceable fruit of repentance. It's not saying feel happy through the tough times. It's saying see the good. This is a gift from Elohim to man. Again, the English glosses right over this. Matat Elohim he. Literally, go look up the word matat and matan. Matat is the masculine, matan is the feminine, or the other way around. This is a bridal gift. It's used, when Shechem really wanted Dinah, and Shechem saying, ask any price. I just want to marry the girl. I just want to marry the girl. Ask any price and gift. The word there is matan. The matan is what the groom would give to the bride as part of the ancient Hebrew wedding ceremony. It was the dowry, if you want to call it that. The down payment. Whoa. So Solomon, wisest man ever, is saying there's nothing better for man to be joyful, not happy, joyful, to do good, that every man should eat and drink, i.e. make the most of your time in this time domain, and know that can you see the good in your toil, because the toil and seeing the good that it brings about, this is Elohim's bridal gift to his bride. Whoa. And this is what society, modern Western society, is teaching you to avoid at all costs. The very process that enables Yah to give you the bridal gift. Society, modern Western society, is robbing you of a bridal position, because it's telling you to avoid good and evil, wrestling, overcoming, trials, temptations, refining. Avoid it. I perceived that whatever Elohim does endures forever. Now, what did Solomon say earlier? What does the worker have remaining from his toil? Treasures on earth or treasures in heaven? Because treasures in heaven are eternal, if I'm not mistaken. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. Elohim has done it so that people fear before him. You're now getting two things that Solomon is saying. This whole process, the why of it all, is to be humbled, and so that people fear before him. Curtis and I are going to speak about the fear of Elohim within a bridal context as the teaching for Sukkot this year. Solomon understood this, and that the storms of life had a part to play in this. Do the storms of life bring about a healthy dose of the fear of Elohim in your life? They should. Paul says this in Romans 12, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, that by the mercies of Elohim, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, set apart, and acceptable to Elohim, which is your reasonable worship. Your reasonable worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of Elohim, what is good and acceptable and perfect. The word here, to have your mind, your heart, your soul transformed, is the Greek metamorpho. To change into another form, to transform. This is where we get the word metamorphosis. You know what butterflies go through when they go from caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly? That's where we get the word from in English, this metamorpho. Now, to use the shadow picture of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly, Is it easy for the caterpillar to become a butterfly? No. You'll read that even in the shadow picture, if you break apart a cocoon of a butterfly to be, the butterfly will die, because there's something about that caterpillar going through the struggle and the change and this wrestling of actually breaking free from the cocoon that actually helps it become the butterfly. And by helping it escape the struggle, you're killing it. You're killing it. Why is that in the creation shadow picture? That is the process by which your mind, your soul, your heart is renewed. That by testing, you may discern what is the will of Elohim. The word testing, dokimadzo, to test and prove, verifiably approved by examination. If you look at the root word of dokimadzo, it's to put metal through the fire to test it for purity. Gold and silver, to examine and verify, to test out an item, to verify it works well. Look at this, to recognize as genuine after examination, to approve, to deem worthy. Worthy of what? This, by the way, should take us right back to the word when David was saying, your waves, your breakers fall on me. The word mishbar and shavar means to test, to examine, to wait, to hope for. It should take us right back. You mean to say that the testings, the storms of life is what actually helps us discern the will of Elohim? Why do you think society does not know what the will of Elohim is? Because it's avoiding the process of testing at all costs. It's robbing itself of a bridal gift. Let me phrase it this way. The storms in your life are Elohim giving you a bridal gift. You want to be the bride of Messiah? There's the process. There's the process to be humbled and to experience the wrestle. Why was Jacob renamed Israel? Because he wrestled and overcame. And thus he was metamorphosed, transformed into something. What and who is Elohim waiting for and hoping for? What's really interesting about this word metamorpho, this is the same word used for the transfiguration on the mount. Interesting. You mean we can go through the same process that our king went through? To be transformed, to be transfigured, to become something else, to metamorphose into something he is hoping and waiting for? So let's go back to the chiastic structure found in Psalm 42 and 43. This psalm is about a journey. Again, remember, in Hebrew, you're going from right to left, from east to west, from the outer court, outside the court, to the court, and you're going from this a place where Elohim's presence is distant, and the end goal is Elohim's intimate presence, bridal speak. But the journey from A to B, from fallen wicked to bridal material, you're going to experience some storms. If you want that Elohim's intimate presence, you're going to experience the breaking, the humbling, the crushing, the storms. You're going to be examined so that the pride can be knocked out of you, so that you can be humbled, so that you can have your heart's desire to see the face of Elohim. You need to go through. By the way, along the way, you will feel that Elohim's forgotten you. because of how raw these things will be. Along the way, you're going to get persecution from those within his house. They will turn against you. And at the very center of this, even though you have a confident expectation, you're still going to struggle. And you're going to ask yourself, I know in my spirit this is the end result, so why am I struggling now? Are people seeing just how deep and beautiful this psalm is? By the way, King David, he understood this. Where do you think Solomon got the discipleship to be able to even end up writing Ecclesiastes? By the way, Solomon had to go through this. We all have a chance to go through this. We all have a chance. Again, his ways are not our ways. His ways involve persecution, refining, the waves, the breakers, the storms of life, Elohim's water tornado pouring down the water, creating destruction, good and evil. And that's what society is saying, avoid. How far have we fallen? Why would John say, why would Yeshua say, would I even see the faith when I return? Anyway, let's stop here for today and do some Q&A on the storms of life. Next week, we're going to see how this will actually bring us to Zechariah's vision of the olive trees and the menorah, and ultimately, by extension, the two witnesses and the greatest of all storms of life, right? The Great Tribulation. And how Psalm 42 and 43, I believe, give us further insight. But for this week, I'm really hoping that people understand that the Creator has not forgotten you. All of you who are struggling, who are wrestling, who are undergoing this battle of good and evil, if you get anything out of this, just know that this is Elohim's way of giving a bridal gift to you. You want to see the face of Elohim? That's how he's ordained for you to see his face. It involves storms, breakers, destruction, so that think of the parable of Yeshua, when Yeshua is saying, he who builds his house upon the sand, and the storms come in and break these things down. If you've got shaky houses, spiritually speaking, built, if you've got temples not of him, spiritually speaking, in your life, and he's breaking them down, the good in that, see the good in that. You have a chance to rebuild something on the rock. Anyway, let's stop here for today. Amen.